Jimmy Fallon was asking Dorothy Williams about the challenges of aging in America when something in her weathered face suddenly crumpled. The 92-year-old woman, who had been speaking with dignity about her long life moments before, began to tremble in her chair. "Jimmy," she said softly, her voice shaking, "I'm about to become homeless, and I don't think I'll survive it." The Tonight Show studio, which had been respectfully listening to her stories of resilience, fell into stunned silence. Dorothy's confession hung in the air like a death sentence that nobody could process. Jimmy's warm expression shifted to one of shock and deep concern, as he realized this wasn't just another interview about senior citizens. This was an urgent cry for help. It was March 20th, and Dorothy had come on the show as part of a segment highlighting remarkable seniors in America. The interview had been going beautifully, with Dorothy sharing stories of raising 5 children as a widow and working until she was. But when Jimmy asked about her current living situation, the facade of strength she'd maintained finally cracked. "I've lived in the same house for 50 years, Dorothy continued, her voice barely audible. "The landlord sold to developers, and they want me out." The words came out like a prayer that nobody was answering. The studio fell into complete silence. Jimmy's face showed disbelief and growing alarm. The audience seemed frozen, confronted with a nightmare that many of them would face in their own old age. 50 years, Jimmy asked gently, his voice full of compassion and outrage. "Dorothy, that's your home." His tone carried the weight of understanding what home means to someone her age. "I raised my children there after my husband died in Vietnam," Dorothy explained, tears beginning to form in her cloudy eyes. "Every room has memories." Her voice broke as she spoke about the sanctuary that was being stolen from her. "My grandchildren took their first steps in that living room," she continued, painting a picture of a life fully lived within those walls. "I was supposed to die in that house." The future she'd planned was being ripped away by forces beyond her control. Jimmy leaned forward in his chair, his entire focus on this elderly woman who represented so many forgotten seniors. "How much notice did they give you?" he asked, though he suspected the answer would be heartbreaking. 30 days, Dorothy replied, the timeline impossibly short for someone her age. "They say I can move to a senior facility." Her laugh was bitter and defeated. "With what money? My Social Security is $800 a month," she continued, revealing the impossible mathematics of survival. "Rent here costs $2,000. The numbers painted a picture of systematic abandonment of America's elderly. The audience was completely silent now, understanding they were witnessing something that transcended entertainment. This wasn't just one woman's story. This was an indictment of how society treats its most vulnerable members. The cameras captured every emotion crossing her lined face. "Where will you go?" Jimmy asked softly, his voice barely containing his emotion. Dorothy's response was devastating in its simplicity. "I don't know," she whispered, the uncertainty terrifying for someone who had survived nearly a century. "At my age, I can't start over." The prospect of homelessness at 92 was a cruelty that seemed impossible to contemplate. "My children live far away, struggling with their own bills," she continued, describing the sandwich generation's impossible choices. "They can't take care of me." The isolation was as crushing as the financial pressure. Behind the scenes, producers were scrambling to figure out how to handle this unprecedented situation. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was an emergency unfolding on live television. They decided to let Dorothy continue, recognizing the importance of bearing witness to her story. "Have you looked into assistance programs?" Jimmy asked, hopefully, though his tone suggested he knew the answer wouldn't be encouraging. Dorothy's expression grew even more defeated. "I've called everyone," she said, listing the bureaucratic maze she'd navigated. "Section 8 has a 10-year waiting list." The systemic failure was evident in every response she'd received. "They tell me I make too much for some programs, not enough for others," she continued, describing the cruel gaps in America's safety net. "There's no help for people like me." The abandonment was comprehensive and devastating. Jimmy made a decision that would define this moment. He stood up from behind his desk and walked over to kneel beside Dorothy's chair, abandoning all pretense of a traditional interview. "Dorothy, this is not okay," he said firmly. "This should not be happening to you." "I worked for 40 years, Dorothy said, looking directly at him with eyes that had seen too much loss. "I paid my taxes, raised good children, volunteered at church." Her resume of citizenship was impeccable, making her situation even more tragic. "I thought if you lived a good life, worked hard, you'd be taken care of," she continued, describing a broken social contract. "But America throws away its old people." Her indictment was as accurate as it was heartbreaking. The vulnerability in her words was staggering. Jimmy reached over and gently placed his hand on her frail arm. "Tell me about your house," he said softly. "What will you miss most?" "The kitchen where I baked Christmas cookies for 50 years, Dorothy replied, her memories flooding back. "The porch where I watched my grandchildren play." Each detail she shared was another piece of her identity being stolen. "I know every creak in the floorboards, every way the light falls," she continued, describing the intimate knowledge that comes from decades of living somewhere. "That house holds my whole life." The connection between place and identity was profound and irreplaceable. "What does a typical day look like for you now?" Jimmy asked, wanting viewers to understand the practical reality of her situation. Dorothy's description was heartbreaking in its detail. "I spend hours calling agencies that can't help me," she said, describing the exhausting pursuit of assistance. "I look at apartments I can't afford." The cruel mathematics of poverty in old age was evident in every activity. "I've started giving away my belongings," she continued, preparing for a future without space for memories. 50 years of life doesn't fit in a homeless shelter. The reduction of a lifetime to what could fit in a suitcase was devastating. "Do you have enough to eat?" Jimmy asked, understanding that housing insecurity often meant food insecurity as well. Dorothy's pause before answering was telling. "I choose between medication and groceries," she admitted, revealing another impossible choice facing seniors. "Last month I skipped my blood pressure pills to buy food." The life and death decisions she faced daily were unthinkable. The audience was visibly emotional now, many people crying as they recognized their own parents or future selves in Dorothy's situation. Her story was creating space for confronting uncomfortable truths about aging in America. "What would you say to younger people watching?" Jimmy asked, recognizing that Dorothy's experience was both warning and plea. Dorothy looked directly into the camera. "Plan for old age," she said with the authority of hard experience. "Because if you don't, you'll be me." Her warning was both practical and prophetic. "And to policymakers," she continued, her voice growing stronger despite her frailty, "we are your mothers, your grandmothers." Her appeal was personal and urgent. "We deserve better than dying homeless." "I'm not asking for luxury," Dorothy said, her voice breaking. "I just want to die with dignity in my own home." Her request was so basic, it highlighted the cruelty of denying it. The studio erupted in applause, but it wasn't celebratory. This was recognition, outrage, and love for someone who had given her life to her country and family, only to be abandoned in return. The standing ovation lasted several minutes. "Dorothy, you will not become homeless," Jimmy said with conviction that surprised even himself. "We're going to figure this out." His promise was made without consulting anyone, but with absolute certainty. "Really?" Dorothy asked, hope creeping into her voice for the first time. "You mean it?" The possibility of rescue seemed too good to believe after months of despair. "Really?" Jimmy confirmed, already mentally planning how to make it happen. "This country doesn't throw away heroes like you." His commitment was total and immediate. They talked for a few more minutes about Dorothy's life, her family, and her hopes for whatever time she had left. She was more dignified and inspiring than any celebrity who had sat in that chair. When the interview ended, something unprecedented happened. Viewers began calling the show immediately, offering help, money, and housing. Within an hour, a GoFundMe had raised $50,000 for Dorothy's housing costs. "I can't believe this response," Dorothy told Jimmy backstage, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. "I thought I was invisible." The sudden attention was as shocking as it was welcome. The episode aired exactly as it happened, with Dorothy's story resonating far beyond the entertainment world. The response was immediate and sustained, with housing advocates and senior rights organizations using her story to highlight systemic failures. Within days, a property management company had offered Dorothy a rent-controlled apartment. A medical foundation covered her healthcare costs. Most importantly, her story had sparked national conversations about senior housing and Social Security adequacy. "You saved my life," Dorothy told Jimmy when she returned to the show 3 months later. Not just from homelessness, but from feeling forgotten. Her transformation was remarkable. She looked years younger. The Tonight Show established a seniors advocacy segment directly because of Dorothy's appearance. They featured regular stories about aging in America, housing inequality, and the dignity of older Americans. Jimmy had found a new purpose in his platform. "Dorothy taught me something profound," Jimmy reflected months later. "Success isn't just about entertaining people. Sometimes it's about seeing people who've been made invisible and making sure the world sees them too." Dorothy Williams' housing crisis became a catalyst for change. Her story led to congressional hearings on senior housing, expanded Social Security discussions, and most importantly, renewed recognition that elderly Americans deserve dignity, not abandonment. Years later, Dorothy would say that nearly becoming homeless at 92 was the most important thing that ever happened to her. "It gave my story meaning beyond my own life," she reflected. "If one grandmother doesn't have to choose between medicine and food because of me, then it was worth it." The lesson of that extraordinary March night was profound. In a society that worships youth, the stories of the elderly matter more than ever. Sometimes the most important voices are the ones we've learned to ignore, and sometimes one person's crisis can wake up a nation's conscience. Dorothy lived 3 more years in her new apartment, surrounded by the belongings that held her memories and visited regularly by people who had been touched by her story. She died peacefully in her sleep, in her own bed, with dignity intact, exactly as she had hoped.